Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So this time it's going to be my first impressions of The Elder Scrolls Online. Now this is going to be more of just a chilled out, not ultra heavily edited first impressions thing, because I think that's probably just the more honest way to give first impressions. So overall, this is definitely a very interesting game. It occupies a weird space, and I don't think that it is in any way a competition for World of Warcraft. And the main reason for that is because they're two completely different games. Honestly, I think World of Warcraft does what it does far better than what I've seen and heard about this. But anyway, so The Elder Scrolls Online itself is basically the MMO adaptation of the Elder Scrolls single-player role-playing series. And that's, Oblivion, Skyrim, Morrowind, etc. And I suppose it does that to a limited degree. One of the sort of trappings of the Elder Scrolls has been that it's, traditionally at least, been a first-person series. This game, The Elder Scrolls Online, does have first-person mode. The problem is that it is completely unplayable, in my opinion. It'll make you feel nauseous, and just in terms of how the combat system works, well, this mode does not work. For an example, there's enemies that teleport right behind you, and it's very... just that's one example of one kind of enemy, but in a situation like that, it's very annoying. Plus, you just have this problem where, because you get so much more information from your greatly enhanced viewpoint, I suppose, from being in third person, if you're playing in first person, you really are going to be playing the game very suboptimally. And if you were to get into that kind of like high-end dungeon content, then it wouldn't actually be it wouldn't be optimal, and you wouldn't be able to roll first person. Now, another problem with the first person mode is that it really highlights a lot of the MMO problems with it. The combat doesn't really have much weight at all to it, if I'm frank. And the weapon animations aren't that great. They're just nothing's very convincing about the combat. Now, I personally don't think that Skyrim does that good a job of making convincing and weighty combat, but it certainly does a better job than The Elder Scrolls Online, and that's understandable, single-player game, all that stuff. But they're still building Elder Scrolls Online as this first-person experience, in some regards at least, via their media, so I think it's just worth saying that first person is just a phoned-in thing. It's not that good. I know that, I think it was maybe 2 years ago, but whenever Skyrim was really hitting the massive sales, a lot of, what I've heard is that within the studio for ESO, there's a lot of debate about what direction they take the game, and it seems like overall they decided to take it in more of a Skyrim-ish manner, and the enhanced first-person mode is definitely a facet of that. I just don't think that it's very good, and I don't think that it's possible to really fight well using it, and also, it just ain't fun to use. I find that the combat works far better when you're in third-person mode, so that's basically what I did. I was running around for the majority of the game in third-person mode. Now, what class did I play? Well, I was playing a Dragon Knight, a Redguard, and the Aldmeri, not the Aldmeri Divinian, the Dragonfall Covenant, and, well, it was pretty cool, I guess. Well, the quests themselves were all kind of forgettable in terms of what you actually do for the quests, but at least they have decent little storylines behind them and that kind of thing. One problem, though, is that these storylines are, of course, conveyed by lots of heavily voice-acted stuff, and the voice acting is something you can only move through while you're standing still at the quest giver themselves. Now, personally, I think the best way to do quest dialogue in an MMO, or in any game really, is to just have it play as you are running about the place. So, I'm not too sure exactly how they would do that, but just say like in World of Warcraft, if you talk to an NPC and then maybe they follow you, but they might play some actual voice acting. I think that would be a pretty good way of doing it. It's sometimes frustrating handing in quests, just clicking through all the different buttons and things, and I think that they could have done that in a more just effective manner, and it's just a bit of an annoying pacing issue, I guess. Though for the people who are lore nuts that enjoy diving through all that stuff, then fair enough. Anyway, so as I was saying, there's decent enough stories to some of the quests, but the quests themselves are the standard affair. There's no getting away from that, they're pretty standard. And so don't really expect anything crazy to be sort of revolutionized. In terms of what I played, though, I started off at Cold Harbor, which is the starting zone. Then I moved on to the main city. Then I took a boat to, I think it's Dros Mackay or something like that. It's this, I suppose, Eastern-style kind of place. I did a few quests there. It only took about 15 minutes. Then I moved on to this Orc Island, and I actually thought that the Orc Island was very cool. And then I went back to Daggerfall itself, in that city that I had came to after I went to left Cold Harbor, and then just started running around the world and that kind of thing. So that's basically what I've played. Now, of course, I've played in the past betas, and I will say that the game has improved a little bit in one or two regards since the first beta I've played, but since some of the more recent ones, nah, it really hasn't. I still think the combat should be tighter, and I just think there are definitely a lot of problems, really. So in terms of the questing itself, well, I already mentioned what I think about the quest flow and that kind of thing. Another thing that I should say, though, is voice acting. The quality really does range a lot. Some of it's awful, some of the writing's not that great, some of the writing's pretty okay, and then some of the voice acting's pretty good. It really is a mixed bag, and it does suffer from that Elder Scrolls problem that I've had with all the games, in that the racial differentiation, in my opinion, is not very well communicated within the voice acting. It all just feels a little bit bland, in a way. So that's a bit of a problem there. Still, low quests are essentially the regular affair. Now, what I did notice, especially once I sort of got into the more free part of the game, really the Orc Island and Dros Mackay are very linear. They're actually hyper-linear, really. But when I moved on to this other place, just the main continent of Daggerfall, or maybe it wasn't continent, just zone. I forget the name of the city, it began with G. But anyway, when I was outside of there, things were definitely opened up a lot more. I actually had a bunch of icons on my map. One of them was for a public dungeon, and the other one was from a mill, and I did both of those, and that's essentially as far as I've got in the game. I'm like I think I'm nearly level 10, and this really is my very first impressions of the game. So, yeah, I just stumbled into this public dungeon, I ran into it. It was actually mostly cleared by people, so, yeah, I just finished off the last few mobs, got my Sky Shard, and left. Now, you're probably wondering what a Sky Shard is. Well, when you collect 3 of them, you get a skill point, and skill points are what you use to unlock new abilities or upgrade existing ones. And a public dungeon, it's really just the dungeon that's open to anyone in the public. So you can all go in, you don't need to be in a party or anything like that. It's a decent enough feature, I guess. And from what I hear, they're actually a little bit too easy, especially when I was just listening to some of the stuff that Force Strategy was saying in his coverage of the game. So that's what the public dungeon was. And then next I found this mill, and I didn't have any breadcrumb quest to take me there. And it was definitely kind of exploratory, actually, because I just saw what looked like a mill on the map and I ran to it, and then I got some quests there. I was under attack by some, like, imps and things like that. So I saved the mill, and that's really where I left it off. I think there's definitely a lot of potential for that questing mechanic to work well. It's the kind of thing that isn't really it wouldn't fit, I don't think, in World of Warcraft as much, but it does fit in a game like this quite a bit more, and I think it definitely probably works rather well for the Elder Scrolls Online, so yeah, it's fair enough, I guess. Alright, so next, that's just a brief overview of questing. Let's just talk about skills and that kind of thing. Well, I started off as a Dragon Knight, and as a Dragon Knight I had like kind of 3 subclasses, like subsets of skills that I could choose from, and it seems like they're completely freeform. You just put a skill point into whatever you want and you'll get that ability. So that was kind of cool. I had an ability which basically attached a chain to the enemy and pulled them towards me. I had one that was like a fire slash, and then that's basically all of the Dragon Knight abilities that I had. But I started using a Sword and Shield quite a lot, because that's just a playstyle that I kind of enjoyed. And the Sword and Shield was, actually, it was fair enough. Like, let's be honest, because the way this game's combat worked, it felt like shit. The Sword and Shield didn't feel great. It didn't feel as good as a Sword and Shield does in any of the other Elder Scrolls games, so that's definitely a bit of a problem. But one of the more interesting things, which is different from some other MMOs, is that when I used the Sword and Shield a little bit more, I was able to buy some abilities which were specific to that. So one of them was like a piercing stab thing, and that was kind of cool, I suppose. So yeah, that's how the skills and classes work. I haven't really got into it too much, but it seems like there are things. Oh, I should probably say for questing, the Fighters Guild, I joined up with them and I did 1 or 2 quests, so that was kind of interesting. And just in terms of questing overall, I think you still have that system of there being the Mages Guild quests, the Fighters Guild quests, then the main storyline with you running around with this prophet guy who's, I think it's Michael Gambon who plays him. No, not him. I think I'm mixing people up. Anyway, it's pretty cool. So yeah, that's essentially that's the lowdown with quests. Anyway, as I was going to say back there before I cut myself off, there are, at least it seems so far, skills which are tied to things like the Fighters Guild or the Mages Guild, which you can unlock, and I guess that's pretty cool. And overall, there does seem like there's quite a lot of freedom in terms of your class builds. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the gameplay, the fight mechanics, and this is the stuff that I'm really interested in. And for me, this is personally where the game falls apart as something that I think I'm ultra interested to play a lot at max level and do a lot of the really hardcore content. World of Warcraft's like just rotation system and the way its classes work mean that there's a lot of like really precise timings and sort of skill-based stuff that you can do with your class. Though with this game, I think it's less so. You only have 5 skill slots, like just numbered onto 1 through 5, and then something you can put on the R key. That's all you have, only 5. In World of Warcraft, you can have a lot more. That means that just the inherent second-to-second combat in Warcraft is a lot more involved. In my opinion, it's definitely more complex. Whether it adds more depth or not, I think that's really a personal preference thing. To me, it adds more depth. I find that the Elder Scrolls Online is going to have a problem with is that it's going to fall to this solution where you just pick 3 or 4 abilities and you can just pull an enemy towards you, do 2 or 3 abilities, and then you're dead. And because you only have a maximum of like 5 or 6 abilities, there's not as much scope there for things to get ultra interesting at endgame and for the complexity of your class to really grow as you level. I love the way that in Warcraft, as you level up, you get more sort of tools and things to use as you go on. And then eventually you do get a very complex class. Now, I totally agree with the changes they're making in Warlords, but yeah, I just think that's one of the key differences. And when we move on into like whatever version of raiding Elder Scrolls Online has, I think it's like a 12-player style thing, I'm just not convinced that its mechanics, its controls, and that kind of thing are really going to lend itself well to the content that I enjoy. So for that reason, I think I'm probably just going to play this game for the first month, and then that might be it. And even at that, I think I might only play it for an hour or 2, because I kind of, so far anyway, I'm more enthused about going and doing a heroic raid with my guild, which should hopefully start soon. Anyway, it's definitely a very different game, and it's the sort of thing where I think if you're a long-term Elder Scrolls fan, you're going to be a little bit pissed off about the combat and how it feels like a half-baked MMO, sort of all just jumbled up. And then if you're like a really long-term MMO player, you're just going to be annoyed at how the MMO parts maybe just don't feel that great. You know, the combat won't have that much depth, but that depth won't really be compensated for the lack of depth won't be compensated for by having some sort of ultra meaty, fast, action-oriented combat, because I just don't think the game has that at the minute. It doesn't have that depth or complexity, and then the combat that it does have just feels crap. There's no weight to your blows, there's no real oomph, and especially when you play in first person. And that lack of a first person mode that's actually fun, I just think that's going to really miff a lot of people who enjoyed Skyrim and enjoyed Oblivion. So I think that's definitely a bit of a problem. Overall, though, yeah, I think where this game really falls down the most is its questing. Not its questing, sorry. It's is its combat. I just don't think the combat's very good. Now, of course, I am going to to keep on playing, and I'll probably maybe in 2 or 3 or maybe in 4 weeks' time give you an updated version of this video to say what I think after a bit more experience. So that's mainly based off what I've done as the Dragon Knight. I've also played as a bow character. I forget the specific name of the class, but I think the bows are some of the worst bows in games that I've ever played. Honestly, they just feel crap. They don't feel like firing a bow. The timings of everything, the way the bowstring pulls back, none of it's convincing, and it all just feels like it's so treacly and just boring and dull. It just doesn't feel good. Now, I don't really think that the Elder Scrolls has ever had very good bow combat, but I'll tell you one thing, the bow combat in Skyrim is definitely a lot better than it is in the Elder Scrolls Online. And then I suppose we have another problem where the mix between MMO and Elder Scrolls game may be to the detriment, in that when you fire a bow, it's kind of like semi-firing on an arc, but as long as you hit near enough an enemy, I find that it will kind of register the hit anyway, so it doesn't really feel like you're aiming your shots. You are aiming your shots, yes, at an enemy, with a reticule and everything, but it just lacks that. It just lacks that bit of polish, that thing that makes it work. You know, the bowstring doesn't sound that good, the animation is crap, there's no impact when your arrow hits the enemy. In a first-person game, or even just an Elder Scrolls game, or what they're trying to go for is immersion and things feeling good, it just doesn't feel good, it doesn't feel convincing. And if your combat system is going to be so, well, for lack of a better term, I don't really like having to use something as loaded but kind of dumbed down a bit. Well, it should compensate for that by being just really visceral and feeling amazing, but I don't think it does, and therefore, to me personally, Warcraft would kind of win in the complexity argument. So yeah, it's interesting, I guess. It's the sort of thing you might have to try out for yourself, but honestly, since they're not doing a free trial, I'd say try it at a friend's house if you really do want to try it. But £50 is the current RRP, and that comes with 1 month. Actually, I'll talk about that in a minute. So yeah, let's just finish off stuff about the overall game. In terms of the music's really good, actually. And the ambient stuff definitely feels nice, it fits with the world, and it's overall just good, solid music. The music's great though, but the sound design is awful. I mean, the sound design's really bad. Things don't sound convincing. Things don't sound like they have oomph or weight. And sound design's very important. I was just thinking about playing, when I was playing my druid earlier, it was a feral druid, and some of the sound effects felt really nice and meaty. I appreciated that. You don't get the same effect as much in the Elder Scrolls Online. So, a little bit of a problem there. Actually, a very big problem when it comes to just tying everything together and making it feel good. So there's that, and then in terms of graphics, this is a bizarre one. I think a lot of people are saying the game looks really good. I can definitely see what they're saying, but I think that, well, coming from the perspective of someone who definitely prefers stylized over fidelity, I just don't think the game looks that great, because it's trying to go with, I want to say realistic, but you could say that Skyrim is trying to look realistic, but it kind of is, but it's also trying to look stylized. Well, the Elder Scrolls Online is still, it's trying to do the same thing, you know, it's trying to be the Elder Scrolls style, but definitely more of a realistic slant in things, in terms of, you know, buildings kind of look like buildings. Albeit the art design of those buildings is certainly unique and Elder Scrolls-y. But the actual graphics of the game let it down. The texture resolutions aren't that great. There aren't a lot of other kind of just cool post effects. And okay, there's the texture resolution, but there's not. If you've ever played Skyrim, or not Skyrim, well, Skyrim with an EMB, or perhaps Crysis 3, or even Crysis, probably Crysis 1 more. But there's all those little things which kind of just effects like SSAO and HBAO and blah 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 blah. And not naming specifics really, but they seem to be lacking, and the world definitely just feels like it's just you standing there and a bunch of okay textures, some okay lighting, but nothing really advanced to make it just feel great. That's a problem. World of Warcraft doesn't have those things either, but it has its style. It has some of those really cool, like, painted on shades and things like that to the actual textures themselves. Elder Scrolls doesn't have that as much. I just don't feel like it has the fidelity to pull off the look that it's trying to do, and because of that, it all just looks a bit pants, really. It doesn't look that great, and that's me running at max. I've got two 670s in SLI. I've got a very beefy computer, so I can run this thing at max frame rates, or not, sorry, max frame rate and max settings. I'm not sure on the exact frame rate, but I'm definitely over 60 for the vast majority of it. So yeah, graphics, a little bit of an issue there. I don't think they look that great, and especially I think that it's definitely not a set of graphics that's going to age well at all, in my opinion. If you look into the distance, you can see lots of jaggy things, you can see bad texture work, you can see just some bad terrain work that's very just weird and blocky in some areas, which really did take me aback, especially in Dros M'Kai or whatever it's called. So yeah, graphics, a little bit iffy, but I guess it's the kind of thing people are just going to have to palate. But in 5 years' time, they're not going to stand the test of time as well as, say, World of Warcraft or WildStar's graphics might. And then just to conclude the video, I'm going to talk about business model. Now, I actually was able to make any race and put them on any faction that I wanted because I pre-ordered. The reason I pre-ordered is because it was the same price. I knew I was going to play it anyway for those like 2 YouTube videos, well, this and probably a follow-up one. So I thought, hey, I may as well, right? I may as well pre-order, and it also means I get the 3 days early access, which would actually mean that it would come at a time where I just had some free time to work on it. So overall, that worked well. But it completely breaks the lore. The way that if you pre-ordered the game, you can make a race on any faction. The way it works is you have 3 factions, and each faction has 3 races. There are lore reasons why those races are against each other. So I think that's really just it's a bit scummy. It's a bit of a scummy pre-order bonus because it affects what people can do in-game in a very tangible way. So that's definitely an issue. Other problems I have, yeah, actually you get a free mount with the collector's edition, like the ultra expensive one. Now, the first time I ever saw a mount vendor, the mount cost about 17,000 gold, and I had just over 1,000. Mounts are very expensive in this game in comparison to what you normally have, so I think it's a little bit much to be giving your free mount away, because it really is very much early access mount. If you buy the collector's edition, that's a problem. Then, of course, they locked an entire race behind a paywall. Now, the Imperials are basically, they're all humans, and to some people, they may not be the most interesting class, or race even, but to other people, they might like the idea of role-playing a regular human in this interesting world. And if you are one of those people, well, tough shit. You need to fork out more money. And that's just awful. Now, if you are playing as an Imperial, you can choose any race, or not any race, any faction that you want. So that's another thing, and that's definitely locking off gameplay to people who pay extra money, and a game that is, charging the $15 a month, plus a very, very hefty box fee. I just think that that is utterly unacceptable. It's just downright wrong, and it's a money grab. I think that a lot of their decisions, at least at the minute, seem to be expressing a lack in confidence of the game's longevity. It's as if they think people are only going to buy it for a month and then maybe play it like Skyrim, get bored, and leave. That's what it nearly seems like, because surely they would have been able to take an option of maybe having the box be half the price with a far more consumer-friendly pre-order bonus, etc., and just get a lot of people in the door and then keep them there with a solid game. Whereas it just sounds like they're trying to get as much money as they can at the very get-go. It doesn't really communicate a great deal of confidence to me, and that's a bit of a worry there. Yeah. Oh, this game, I don't know. I've conflicting opinions. I think though that it's the combat. That's the killer for me. It's the combat. It's boring. It's boring to me. And then one final thing to say is I don't think we know a great deal about the endgame. Sure, they're going to have these 12-person dungeons. I'm not too sure how that'll tie in with the actual game's combat. They only just, like, a week ago started talking about endgame, like some of the other features they were going to do. They're going to have these level 50, basically max level zones that are designed to be done with a few other players. It's essentially a questing zone, but designed to be done in a group. That's one of their major endgame features. And that, honestly, I prefer that being like a raid or something. Yeah, I'm not particularly convinced this game at endgame, at the very end, is going to have enough in terms of interesting features and things for people to keep on doing. In Warcraft, there is a lot, so I think, yeah, at least for my style of play, Warcraft may have the edge, but I'll keep on playing Elder Scrolls Online, but I just can't really see that changing too much. I think one final thing to say as well is that PvP is apparently a giant part of this game, and I have not played PvP yet. So I will do that, and in the second video, in however many weeks it takes for me to get to that stage, I'll talk a bit about PvP. From what I've seen, it does look pretty cool, looks nifty. There's definitely the whole sieges and things like that, and lots of players on screen at once, so that could be interesting. I'd be a little bit worried that it would turn into too much of a mindless Zerg, but I haven't played it, so I can't really pass judgment on it, though it certainly does seem interesting based on what I have heard from various other people. Anyway, so that's my thoughts on the Elder Scrolls Online. Essentially, it's a very odd game. It's not competition for World of Warcraft because they do different things. Well, A, because they do different things, but B, I think Warcraft is definitely a more complete and polished product at the minute. And then, I suppose, C, money. It costs a tiny amount of money to get in for your first free month into World of Warcraft. And actually, just thinking about some of the other MMOs that are coming up, in WildStar, I'm not too sure what the actual boxed price or that kind of thing is, but I know it's just the standard subscription fee. Well, in that game, you actually you can buy game time with in-game currency, similar to EVE Online's Plex system. Now, perhaps a great deal of people won't avail of that because they won't be able to make the money, but at least that's something that'll entice some people in, I suppose. And then just as a final note on free-to-play, some people are saying, OMG, this game's going free-to-play. Look, I don't want to comment on that. I don't know. I can't predict the future. Well, okay, I did predict the future with the Old Republic, but I think that it could definitely happen to this game. Actually, right, I'll make a prediction. If this game doesn't have, within 1 month, a very robust endgame, it will probably end up going free to play. or maybe 1 or 2 months, but it needs a robust endgame. And though, just in terms of free-to-play in general, and it's kind of interesting that this, the Elder Scrolls Online, WildStar, and then of course Warcraft, they're going to be 3 kind of big-ticket games that aren't free-to-play. And especially with these two new ones coming on the market, straight up with a sub fee, I'm actually kind of happy. I don't like free-to-play. I don't like developers, and now, actually, I understand that a lot of developers have to do this, because it's how you make money. You need to make money and monetize your game. That's why I would always just prefer to have the a la carte option. Though I don't like it in some games where it's like, oh, you can only do X amount of PvP dungeons, or X amount of raids, or you need to pay to get into this area, or something like that. I don't like that. I think that really just takes away from a role-playing game. It takes away from immersion. So I guess no matter what, I'm still pretty happy from a gameplay experience that the Elder Scrolls Online and that and both WildStar are going to be sub-fee games, because I just like that a la carte option. Though, of course, if there was a free-to-play game which would let you just pay your 19, or not your 19, your 15 a month, and then you know, you're faced with literally zero indication that anything is free-to-play in the game, then I suppose I'll be happy enough with it. But still, hey, look, World of Warcraft's still my thing. It's still what I plan on, on playing, obviously. I don't think that Elder Scrolls Online is going to take away from Warcraft that much. I'm just getting into heroic raiding. I'm leveling up my, or not leveling up, I'm item leveling up my druid. I'm messing around making money. I'm doing a whole bunch of things in WoW even, and yeah, I'm just flat out having a lot of fun in the game. And right now, my initial impression, based on what I have seen of the game, what I've played in the alphas and beta, not the, well, I suppose yeah, one of them was an alpha. Anyway, what I've played in the Elder Scrolls Online, in all their various stages and launch, is that currently I don't see it being direct competition to World of Warcraft. It's flat out different, and I don't think it will ever be competition to World of Warcraft based on the kind of game that it is. The question that this game faces is, will it have enough endgame content with enough longevity to sustain its unique audience? Because it definitely is a game with a very unique and niche audience, in my opinion. Perhaps that audience won't be as big as Bethesda are hoping. I kind of think that might actually be the case. But anyway, hey, that's been it for me. This has been a rambly enough video, so thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time.